Excuse me.
well.
Literally just said.
First breath of air that Robbie has taken. We were just ironically speaking for, that was 26 minutes in a row prior to this. Prepping, right? Warming up, getting our minds ready, our voice. And we did so much undulation of emotion and philosophy and speech that we ironically felt like we needed to have a smoke after. It was so eventful. And here we go. We start the show and Robbie's coughing.
Just can't contain it anymore.
Yeah. It was a big, like, I'm ready to go. And yeah.
Getting ready for the welcome back.
Are we in the 20s? Are we in the 20s for episodes yet?
Yeah, this is 25.
Nice. 25, silver anniversary. Is it silver? No. Yeah.
Yeah,
married for 25 years.
Yeah, I guess it's silver. Yeah, so it's been a few weeks since we met last. I think a little bit longer than usual. Anything new in your neck of the woods?
No. When will people probably when will the peoples, all the peoples who like and listen to us hear this? Around what date? In June, maybe?
Maybe, yeah, perhaps. Okay. Yeah,
all right.
Perhaps. Yeah.
Well, I will, as you're listening to this, I will be sailing on the Spokane River, kayaking with my new binoculars from Right On, RITON, sponsor for today. They don't even know it, but they are. And so that's what I'm up to. I'm currently kayaking on a river in Spokane.
Or if someone is listening to this in their Neuralink in $21.99, we have either been uploaded to the Matrix or.
Yep. That's deep. We're talking about beforehand conversation on knowledge and others knowing what our knowledge is and what our thoughts are. So it very well could be that if you are listening to this and it's way ahead, times are cool right now. It's pretty cool. Pretty cool time to be alive.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Cognitive strategies and cognition is really important part of the lexicon today. Physicality, not so much. And we are the physical folks. Let's get physical should be our opener.
Tagline.
Olivia Newton-John across the screen.
Go from intellectual or mental to physical.
Yep.
We are, whenever you hear this, you may hear it at different times, but we are recording this around the time that Elon Musk and his company Neuralink have made it possible for a monkey to play Pong with its mind while sucking a banana smoothie through a straw.
At the same time of putting autonomous electric cars, 1.5 miles through tunnels underneath cities.
While also trying to colonize Mars.
So there's that's happening at the current time. So you could look back and find this very humorous, and we appreciate that. We appreciate it.
So that was all surreal. Now, another surreal thing that I had happen to me recently that I was going to ask you about. People have been telling me for years to watch Every Second Counts, and I had never watched it.
Oh, wow.
And I was on kind of a mini break last week, and I watched it, and I was just thinking of the time difference between watching it back when I started in CrossFit, watching it now, and it was surreal. It was very surreal.
Yeah, right. Wonder what people in the future will look back. First of all, I think about how they will actually see this media. I find that interesting, right? Like how will they actually see it?
Right.
And then secondly, what will they think about what we were doing? Like I could just see people turning away, like what the? Why are they taking their shirts off on dirt? Why did they fly to the ground so many times? Why are they repeating that movement? Like all these things.
It reminded me of like back when I used to do aggressive rollerblading, kind of like the old school, like, skate videos, like, you know what I mean? Like an alternate culture type thing, like a subculture that's kind of on the rise, and
Like
like
Tybo.
kind of, yeah, but like people, Fran times and thrusters, and uh, it was just, oh my gosh, like, so I grew up in Southern California. Like I took my dad at one point, like he worked out over at CrossFit Newport Beach, and like seeing Brian McKenzie take John Wellborn through running drills, it was like, what? And then I had no idea that, your CrossFit affiliate was like right across from your house. And it was just, it was a very interesting experience watching it now. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah,
I,
those are good times, man. Those are good times.
I don't know if you have any memories or thoughts around
Oh gosh, I as I
going.
just, as I just thought about it, there's too many, and there's a rank ordering of importance of those, and I have them classified in humor versus emotion and spiritual areas.
Yeah.
So much. So yeah, lots of great times. Maybe another show dedicated, and we'll tie that in. We'll link it in, and and converse on some of the things inside of there and tie it into philosophy because it's good. I like speaking about those times.
Just so that you're aware and you're not caught off guard, Brandon is currently making a compilation from that of you making an ad for CrossFit, like a few various sayings. So just so you're aware, if CrossFit HQ puts out something,
It's
James.
been done. It's been done indirectly already. Multiple snippets just have never been gathered. So good for Brandon for gathering all that.
Yeah. So under the table.
You could get better footage, I think, on the pre-games and then post-games coverage of me as an athlete, like my videos with CrossFit or stuff on .com, because that's still there. Um, there's more juicier stuff in there.
Yeah. I'll have to let him know. That's another
Inside
project.
inside the Kool-Aid drinking. That's in the memes. He should have like purple lips on me. So indirectly, people are like, "That looks like it's from Kool-Aid." Exactly.
We have to get at it before the internet deletes it forever. Like
Yeah.
it's still there,
Oh,
but
you got to package it up. You got to
yeah.
package it up. Yeah, because once it does, I mean, I'll just run the bandwagon of never having said any of that.
Yeah. Yeah. The monkey playing Pong was surreal. Watching every second counts was, I don't know about equally surreal, but definitely a
Well, if you were sucking on some form of sweet beverage, probably it's probably very similar in surrealness.
yes. All right, guys. So today we're going to talk about instinct or innate knowledge and fitness. So just to kind of give you a sense of like what the idea is here, like how we're connecting this discussion about innate knowledge from philosophy to fitness. James, you've mentioned a number of times this notion that like fitness is within us. It's
Mhm.
something that we are inherently capable of. We have, to a certain extent, we don't come out knowing how to back squat with a barbell, but we do have certain instincts around walking or running that
Navigating.
moving, crawling, jumping, lifting, all those different things that we don't necessarily, I mean, we can be taught how to refine those things, but as long as we have food and water, like we're going to express those things on our own
Yeah.
without necessarily needing to be taught. So, um, the questions we're going to be asking center around like first question is like, what is that type of knowledge? What type of knowledge do we have for fitness that is more innate or instinctual or health? And then what are the implications of that? That's kind of the even more interesting philosophical question of like, if this is in us, does that make, does that go back to our discussion of coaching being like a temporary measure to get us back to the point where we're autonomous? How much is within us? How much is not? So this couplet that we have coming up, this episode is going to be primarily about what are the contributions to what we do with fitness and health that come from instinct or are innate. And then next episode, I figured we'd talk more about experience, which is obviously a huge topic in and of itself, but what are the contributions from experience?
Okay, that's good to lay it out too, so we don't get too heavy and trying to work back from saying it's one or the other.
So, a very central question that runs throughout the history of philosophy is what is or are the ultimate sources of knowledge, experience or reason slash intellect? So, if you go all the way back to Plato and Aristotle, Plato famously thought that things like geometry or logic or math, or I mean, it's not really theology proper at that point. Um, because it's well, I mean, depending on how you look at it, it's certainly not monotheistic theology. Morality, all those different things in a certain way were a type of recollecting things that we already once knew. Um, Experience serves to kind of wake those things up in us, but it is not the ultimate source of that type of knowledge. Aristotle, on the other hand, and obviously this is overly simplistic, there are nuances here, but famously sided with experience and was kind of the father of what is today called empiricism, whereas Plato was the father of modern rationalism, where the idea is most of our knowledge comes from experience. And then we obviously in the medieval period there are discussions around this as well, but the famous, I would say, reemerging of this discussion comes in the Enlightenment period with folks like Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, Malebranche, being the Enlightenment rationalists in one way or another, where the idea is that at least a good part of our knowledge is innate or a priori, and it precedes experience. And experience serves to wake that up, but it's not its source. Whereas the empiricists like Locke, Berkeley, Hume, and Reid argue that no, pretty much all our knowledge comes from experience. And then Kant, my dude, the guy who I studied and did my dissertation on, he's kind of the great synthesizer of those two and tries to combine those two. So the central philosophical question we'll be asking is, what's the ultimate source of our knowledge? Is it ultimately just all derived from experience? Sometimes if you read a philosophy text, you'll hear this referred to as a posteriori knowledge, just meaning, you know, posterior, like after one is born or something like that. Or are there certain central aspects of our knowledge of the world that either precede experience or are independent of any particular experience? And this is sometimes referred to as a priori knowledge. Now, if we connect this to the fitness example, what we're asking is, are there any aspects of our knowledge of fitness and health that are innate, instinctual, precede experience? And if so, what are the implications of that? What are the things that we have just being humans? And then what are the things that we need to learn through culture, whether it's, skateboarding or barbells or what have you? And then in the next episode, we'll talk more about experience. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you know if there's anyone that's doing some philosophy on the like a separate concept of living, meaning for the I would say for those who would argue the point of it would come knowledge would come through experience. Has anyone ever just created a metaphorical hypothesis of a different, like a multi-universe or a multi-lived experience that, and in that, you could pull out some things that look like, see, aha, it's because this is the way things were put together in this other universe. We see it in a different light as to how we come to know things. Has that ever been proposed, or people thought,
Um,
or
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I mean, obviously, or like in, um,
I was trying to think of. I apologize. I'm trying to think of. I apologize for stopping your thought there. I
oh,
was
okay.
trying to think of a stranger in a strange land, right? And the how that fiction concept, or even the three body problem, the Chinese author. Um, I forget, it was three body problem. Yeah, the three body problem. They come up with these ideas that they're so hard for you as the reader, right? to actually think that that's how all these people gained knowledge in this, idea. And but what it does, though, it makes you think, like, well, where did knowledge come from if that's the way that's presented? And so, yeah, I just thought about that, as wondering if there was places we could go to kind of listen or read from people who have thought about this in a different idea, you know.
So you're thinking like, I guess the two things I immediately think of are, one, the notion of like a more religious side, more like a soul being reincarnated and relearning things that it had once forgot, and on the other side, more of like a modern quantum mechanical, like multiverse.
Yeah,
Like, were you thinking
I'm
more
on
about
the I'm on the latter form of the
that?
concept, if anyone has kind of thought about that, and I'm just trying to think of the ways in which there is a whole different, quote unquote, from out of Africa to an experience of humans, right? That imagine there was something, some door switches or switches back way back that led to a completely different form of knowledge. And then that could be at least a place for someone's brain to go to say, okay, that's what happened, and therefore this is where we are. And I don't even want to talk about an alternate reality. I'm just thinking it could create some creativity around an option for how we gain knowledge. That's all.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank on fictional pieces that draw on that, although I know there are tons of movies and TV shows and books, but for some reason I'm drawing a blank. But I mean, in philosophy, both today and especially with someone like Leibniz and others, this whole question of like possible versus actual worlds, what is so for Leibniz, for example, one of the interesting questions in philosophy is what things would be true across all worlds, like 2 + 2 = 4, the truths of logic, and what things would be contingent. Humans have 5 fingers. What about the world where we have 6 fingers, or
Yeah.
where we don't come out of Africa? You know what I mean? Like all those little, which things are contingent and which are
Yeah.
sometimes called
Yeah.
necessary in philosophy. And yeah, I see your point there, and I think it's I think it's relevant for the fitness discussion because, of course, the fitness knowledge we're going to be referring to, even if it is instinctual or innate, it isn't going to be like 2 + 2 = 4. It's going to be very tied to that evolutionary process. And in
Yes.
a different possible world,
Yes.
if the evolutionary process had been different, or if we evolved in the tundra first, or a
Yes.
jungle. I mean,
Yes.
yes, our capabilities would be different. So I see your point there very much.
Yeah, and that's all I was. Yeah, that's all I'm wondering. And maybe, anyways, I just wrote it down as something for me to kind of think about and look for some reading on, um, which would kind of then, at least open my mind to possibilities as to where that is. Um, but no, right away I get right to the heart of the matter of, one thing that I consistently deal with, and I'm looking for your feedback, working backwards from our original question. Um, I wrote down why know things. Why KNOW? Like why, you know, who has spent time with that question? Like why should we know things, or why do we know things?
Yeah.
Um, any thoughts on that before I get into, my classic move is to strip it down, take away all emotion, and get to biological pieces, and then like wrangle with that. But previous to that, what's your thoughts on, um, you know, on
I
that?
mean, I guess my first thought that's going to be relevant for our discussion today is, and I think we've mentioned this on previous episodes, the distinction between knowledge how and knowledge that.
Yeah.
So, like, we may know how to walk, we may know how to crawl, we may know how to jump and lift things. But so to your question of like, why know anything, really the implicit thing in there is why know that anything. Like, we can't help but know how to do certain things because otherwise we
Yes.
can't even get on in the world.
Right.
Um, I mean, of course, there are certain things we don't need to know how to do. I don't need to know how to roof my house or something like that. So, I mean,
Right.
but there are certain biological capacities that we need to have some sense of how to nurse and go to the bathroom and like just.
Yeah.
But then there's that deeper question of like, why know that?
Yeah. Yeah.
the Earth is rotating around the sun. Like, why should we care about that? Or that the Egyptians existed a long time
Yeah.
ago, the dinosaurs were wiped out. So,
Yeah.
um,
Does it keep going back so that we end up in some of those areas, which would be reasons, which would be um, duplication of our species, reproduction and evolution, consistently? Do we go back to those? Do you think some people would say that's where you could end up? Say,
yeah, I think it's gonna.
we have learned through the asking that question over and over.
I think it's going to be a mix of extrinsic plus intrinsic. There's going to be certain things like the invention of the wheel that help replicate our species further, and then there's going to be things like us knowing about the Egyptians and how they lived. Does that make a material difference for how we progress? Not really. Just
Yeah.
intrinsically interesting, and
Yeah.
same thing with knowing the age of the universe, or what dinosaurs were like. Doesn't
Yeah.
make too much of a difference for our world now. Um, Practically speaking. But yeah, there's going to be that extrinsic element of like, this is worth it for some other reason, there's survival of the species. And then there's going to be the intrinsic element of humans just like to know.
Yeah. 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 Well, I thought about it, you were mentioning there. There's some things that, wasn't it Orwell that said those who, I just pulled that in from something I heard the other day. Those who know the past, or those who know the past and own the past, or those who own the present can work for the past, and those who own the concept of the future or the past, something like that. Anyways, I was just thinking about I totally screwed that one up, but along the lines of what you said of intrinsic versus extrinsic, I guess we have to factor in there what we consider to be a really great, valuable existence. We have to create some ideas what that is. And so, to your point, wheel allowed us to reproduce. And well, um, what's our definition of making that better? Was it, was getting across land making it better for the whole? You know, and the same arguments can be made for medication and refrigeration, etc. I just want to make mention that I think understanding what a really good, you know, definition is of a really valuable life, or a really good life, quote unquote, needs to come inside of that as well, right? Anyways, that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Um, Sorry.
And I think across traditions and times and places, something that bubbles up is eventually, once you have those basics that are necessary for survival and like reproducing and having a family and stuff like that, it is the pursuit of intrinsically interesting things that aren't necessary for
Yeah.
reproduction of the species, whether it's music or art or philosophy, or it's interesting that those higher order things generally very much aren't necessary for survival, and in fact are, if anything, detracting from the things that sometimes are necessary. You know what I mean? They kind
Yeah.
of pull the other direction. So
Yeah. 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 That makes me think a lot there. But it does lead into this point today, or the conversation, because um, and I keep thinking this way. It doesn't mean this is where anyone should go, but this is the way I look about it. It's like just recognizing that you know what we know and what we do and how we live today, and we'll put fitness inside of that just for our conversation. From, let's say, from 1974, my existence, till now, right? I just keep thinking, what did we know? What did we know? As a whole, from 1974 to now, based upon how things are operating, versus like 867 or 874 to 921 AD, right? Like, I know to giggle on that, but there's there's just so much difference. It doesn't, and I guess weighing out like what is a life till 48 years of age then, and what did you know, and what's your perception of what you know and how much you know relative to, and what similarities are inside of that, which I think does tie into the fitness point, is that in 874 I would have still had five fingers, and when I was born I still would have had to try to figure out how to go from the ground to standing, and grasping things and getting across land, and then eventually helping out those around me so that I could, feed myself eventually over time, have a roof overhead, etc. So with inside of that is a physical thing that is pretty similar to the same thing today from 1974 to 2020. So there's some of the pieces inside. I'm not sure if it helps our conversation on the knowledge of, but those are where I strip down. I strip it down, and I could go further back, right?
Oh
Further
yeah.
back in time, and it allows us then to then jam on saying, with regards to fitness, well, did I know that previously, right? Did I know that, or was that just something that from our original existence over millions of years of this practice of hominids, did we just have this inside, you know, um, innate of, coming out, um, being taken care of, and nurtured, and then eventually slowly breaking that gap from the nurturing to the navigation. And that is all a physical process that, I guess I'm still stuck on it, a physical process. Whereas, and that's this, where I was thinking, I don't know if it would be in a whole different universe, in a whole different concept of universe. I'm having a hard time seeing how it would be any different of us just from that, developmental stages, like not having that deeply embedded thing of movement. And the reason why I'm sticking on that is that I'm tagging movement inside of fitness. Like I'm not thinking Globo Gym bicep curl Arnold Schwarzenegger right here. I'm thinking movement and physicality is the base support of that. And I think that's been learned over millions of years of this navigation from going from the ground to standing and doing these physical things. And just how we express that physicality has changed, right? Has changed, but there's still those basic things that are there. Um, because we're so tied, I think, strongly to physical matter and biology.
Yeah. I mean, at one point it was all learned in one sense, but then as the species developed, it became kind of a program that,
Yeah,
was
right.
an instinct uh, in all human beings. That made me think of I'll have to see if I can find it and send it to you. A super interesting article in an online magazine called Quanta that does different things on physics and biology and math. But anyway, they were talking with someone who I believe he's an evolutionary biologist and talking about like what should we expect aliens to be like. And so he was joking, well, like when you watch Star Trek or Star Wars, you're always wondering like, why the hell do these aliens look like us? Of course, they're going to be like different in some ways, just like we want it to look like a human. But then he goes on and he talks about how no, a lot of this is going to come down to physics. Like we should expect things that have to navigate through like gaseous substances are going to have wings, and things that move along the ground are going to need to have some type of locomotion, and things that move through liquids. So that's all just by way of like going back to that point that you were bringing up that I think is a good one of like, yes, the whole evolutionary story could have been, could have had a different starting point or different, environmental conditions or what have you. But there might be certain fundamental things that are just unique to biological organisms that need to stand and walk in such a way, and things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Um, yeah, I like that. And I like what you said earlier too of, I forget how you framed it, of the, like, would 2 + 2 = 4 in a different universe? I think that's a really great way of thinking about the quandary that I have of, would those things be the same in a whole different context? And I do pull that over then to the physical functioning, um, and uh, and reproduction and creation of another human. And then how do you, assuming that we do want those humans to survive and move on, and assuming we do want to to procreate, and to keep doing that, then I would assume, yeah, to your point, that it's probably in there because of all that that stretched time. But I think another interesting point inside of that, though, too, I was just more recently listening to Robert Sapolsky talk about this in indirectly. It was a part of aggression and how we behave in aggression and where that comes from, and the way that he lays it out is just beautiful. Um, but it made me think about that that intricate point of, was it like, the common thing that we're still not really sure about yet? Was it fire, and and other things around that period of time that like led to brain, and the story of brain evolution, right? And and I think that has an interesting part of the story, right? Like our cognitive repertoires and how strong, relatively that cognitive ability has gotten over a really, really long period of time, And but I think there wasn't a quick shift like December 1st, whenever. Um, but there was this interesting shift based upon whether it was fire and tools and other things that allowed us to navigate, quote unquote, better, you know, and that could also have been timed effectively with the navigation better of what we did as a child growing up, and again, physicality, right? What do we do physically? And you can just imagine the generations and the millions of years, millions, not like 60 years, but millions of years. I think there's something built in there from that, switch in brain development, that's tied into the physical as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it informs the capabilities that we have today.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. So that's my original thoughts on the starting points of the definitions.
Okay. So two quick important notes up front before we talk about sort of a priori knowledge and then launch into the fitness discussion. So we'll almost certainly do a couplet at some point on biology and culture. And so that obviously overlaps with what we're talking about today, but I think there's a whole slew of separate discussions there. Nature versus nurture, same type thing. Another one I just thought about as we were discussing this and going back to the Neuralink, like I think this would be a great one for an episode, given all the technology is doing, like how intrinsically important is our physicality to who we are as humans, right? So, if the Yuval Hariri quote, is to be believed, like, we're going to be uploading ourselves to the Matrix or whatever's supposed to come in the future, and you know, does that strip us of a essential element of who we are? I mean,
Yeah.
just that discussion around like how closely tied is being human to being a physical being that can walk and talk and move and do all these different things.
Yeah.
So that was note one. And then note two is, for the purposes of this episode, I'm taking a priori, instinctual, innate as to mean roughly the same thing. They're not exactly the same thing, but the connection I'm drawing between philosophy and fitness for this episode is we're trying to suss out in this episode what sort of things are contributed and do we have in us essentially when we are born, and what things that we'll discuss in the next episode do we need to learn from experience. And then the deeper philosophical question about like, what are the implications of that? If we do have these things in us, if we do have this knowledge of how to do certain physical things when we are born, what implications does that have for the practice of fitness? So
Yeah. Well, I went back to also Harari's point, and it does tie in a little bit to that is, or actually, I think we may have mentioned that offline prior to our conversation of, um, these are not physical times. That's just take a real generalized picture of, 1645. Well, I guess actually I got to be a lot better clear my history on that. But there were times in past where physicality wasn't even known as a thing, but people were physical. And we could say, maybe, I'm not sure if your point, if you can remember this one to come back and we could even hit on this, and it could be, sub importance, but you may be able to know, maybe pre-enlightenment could have been a time where there was this balance of physical and cognition. If there was just two things, right, just two areas of a generalized, you know, and then from that point on, industrialization, technology, machines, agriculture, et cetera. Um, I think that the physicality component is less and less, ironically. And I say it's ironically because it's an adaptation, right? We are adapting to making things easier for us. And so as this adaptation, you can just see where physicality is starting to fit in here, right? To your point of what Harari said, I ask some of the big points on that now too, even though it may not even be in my lifetime, my existence to actually experience this concept or that concept. Notwithstanding that I really do think that he's onto something in terms of what the future may look like for that, just based upon current times. Um, what does happen to those, let's call it natural human physical processes? What does happen? I think about really simple things like um, communication and touch and visceral reaction with another human, right? And tied into that is intimacy, and tied into that is love and tenderness, and what can lead into, of course, areas of sex and reproduction, right? So if that, even on smaller and smaller percentage, becomes larger and larger percentages of not being in existence because a lot majority of the time is focused on the cognitive strengthening, where you know are we just basically doing that small time in reproduction in order to just propagate so those other people can get hooked up to VR sets, for what's considered an experience? I have a hard time like dealing with that. But the reason why I think that's important, and where my brain went to on it, is that the physical experiences is real deeply tied into, um, I think, yeah, our current understanding of what we know and how we know. I just think it's just such a, I just see it moving further and further away. And sorry, I went off track, and I'm not even re- recalling where we were going on the point. But the physical, I just stopped at the physical future aspect thing that I just can't get past.
No, that's okay. I think you were talking about like is there a time where like the physical was balanced with the cognitive before
Yeah.
things went awry? I mean, a question I always ask, and uh, Jared Diamond and others have written about this, is like, was agriculture the inflection point, right? Like we had essentially, and if there are any evolutionary biologists out there listening and I'm butchering the history, please let me know. But essentially, there was some sort of homeostasis before agriculture, right? There's some humans had some rough homeostasis with the surrounding environment, with animals, things like that. And then agriculture comes along and, you know, gives birth to a lot of different things that end up being seemingly good things: culture, and, the written word, and literature, and philosophy, and art, and music. A lot of not so great things too. But like ever since that point, 10,000 years ago, roughly 10,000 years ago, we've been on a course that's not really taking us very far away from homeostasis and physicality. So was that the inflection point that just kind of took things in a different direction?
Yeah, thank you for that. Because yeah, that's why I can't land on it, but yours makes definitely more sense. Um, and I just purchased those three big ones: collapse, upheaval, and guns, germs, and steel. That I have, probably it's going to take 12 months to get through, so I can get more information to add to that. But I'm glad you're thinking about it the same way. It's yeah, it does. And the reason why this is important to this is, this is why this conversation today, Robbie, it's still a question, right? We are actually questioning this. The fact we are questioning this is super interesting, but that's why we're questioning it, because we just we see physicality all the time, and we practice it more so, and we honor it and kind of play with it, and we're digging deeper in it. Yet yet we see that we're like forcefully constructing it now. It's like, well, you got to do it. Well, why do I got to do it? There's, I have Amazon, I have wheels, I have I have this chair, you know. I have toilet seats with pads and carpet in bathroom. Like, things are really, well, it's weird, but things are really comfortable, you
Yeah.
know. And so that's why this is important. This is an important question, of how did this knowledge come to be and what we do within fitness. And it should make sense that it seems like super simple, but it's not super simple if you don't look at that historical context of physicality and its importance in our existence and where it sits now, right? And I think, yeah, I think it's important.
Yeah, and I think going back to what we were saying, earlier with Plato talking about knowledge being a type of recollection, Socrates famously said that he was a midwife to knowledge, and you could almost think of coaches or what we're trying to do. It's like people have essentially forgotten what is within them.
Yeah, yeah,
And so, part of what we're going to be doing in this episode is talk about, like, well, what is actually within us,
yeah.
fitness wise, and then what are the implications of that? Like, you need to realize this is actually within you, and you have the ability to do this and to express these things. And um, yeah, so
Yeah, I think, yeah, there's, you can, and if we're, I think it's a good attempt today, but as I think it's always marred or colored by therapeutic, ideas, right? So let's take the DNS concept, dynamic neuromuscular stabilization, I think is the terminology for it. Um, Specific protocols, and they tie in young person development and observing that has happened like billions of times. I think it's 100 million. No, so I forget what the number is of how many lives, names we've been through, as an example. It's happened a lot, right? And so if it's happened a lot and it's just been over and over, and like, there's not this massive, big, like, do you roll over? Do you get that? Do you get that? It's not this. It's just like it just happening, right? Like belly, up to prone, push up to prone position, get that leg in, flip over, grasping things, learn how to get to the other side, crawling into a lunge, standing up, holding on to things, standing. You just heard that very short interlude experience there, right? But that's been duplicated. And this is to drive this point you were just saying of like what's innate inside of there. I think it's some of those patterns, right?
yeah,
Like, our hip can't go in some directions, right? And so it's a good question to ask, well, why can't it go in that direction? It's like, well, I'm not sure. But in a lot of cases, it allows us to get down to the ground and pick something up and then stand back up with it. And then we do have metabolic things inside of us that we have no control over. They just operate, that allow us to like pick that thing up that we did and carry it for a certain distance without like falling over or or gassing out and not being able to hang on to it. So inside of that, there's like locomotion, right? Our legs are moving back and forth. We're rotating in order to basically make that happen. Our arms can go in multiple different areas. Our fingers can grasp things. Like, to be able to hold on to things is phenomenal. Like, this is so unbelievable, right? And if you don't know how unbelievable it is, talk to someone, which I have. I've trained with individuals who've lost a finger or have had a full finger removal or et cetera, and just talk to them about their experience and grasping things, right? It's a different thing. So, just saying, like, some of those things are, we have probably just over time lost sight of, in terms of practice. And this is why we try to tie it into CCP of what we call patterns, right? Patterns of bending and squatting and lunging and pushing and pulling in core, because it allows a nice framework for coaches to teach these, let's call it primal patterns, right? And I think those do come from, uh, our, our knowledge over time that we've gained. Like these are the things that we can do. So I'm not sure where that lands us for the innate biological movement pieces that are in there that we now know.
No, I think that's a great start, and it's a indication that there's a whole slew of things that we know how to do without knowing anything about how we are able to do it. Just, you know what I mean? Like,
Yes. Yeah.
a baby instinctively knows how to do these things. And, obviously its parents can help it refine it and things like that. But if a baby were to be, somehow find its means of survival independently of other humans and not be taught anything, like it would learn how to do all these different positions.
Well, yeah,
Um,
and there is lots of data to show this for those who are interested. You'd have to read through and scrape through a lot of it, but when there's opportunity for movement, but there is an obvious, what they would consider a measured lack of nurturing emotional components, etc., you don't have a lack of physical competency happen just because of that. So your question that you were asking there is a good one, and it's interesting to say, well, where is there evidence to show that if a human didn't have quote unquote guidance or the ability somehow to like operate under these things? No, it still does occur. Rolling over, turning on back, like this will occur, right? Unless, of course, there's you got some Skinner box thing going on when you swaddle them till they're 3 or something. I don't know. I was trying to think of this stupid fatalistic version of it for studying purposes. But they will still gain physical repertoires. This is the yet. Let's say I'm trying to find the words that sit more softly with this, but a child is probably not treated with nurture and care. There's definitely some cognitive and psychological repertoires they lack due to that. So there's something around this physical thing that's in place that even if it's taken away from the signaling and role modeling, whatever, they will eventually end up standing up, walking across land, grasping things, etc. Whereas over here in the cognitive realm, if it's not taken care of, some form of signaling, role modeling, nurturing, conditioning, whatever we want to call it, there is some repercussions of that in competencies. So that's one of the areas where is strength for this concept of like it's just in us, we'll learn to, you know, grasp it, et cetera. And I think the bigger question is what we talked about previously. Well, why is that in us?
yeah.
I think it's some of the basic things, learning how to take care of oneself, fuel oneself, realize what this is, and then see that you want to turn yourself into others around you, and it's like, oh, I guess that's a good thing. We need more of us around, you know?
Yeah. And obviously everyone, is aware of the fictional example of Tarzan, of course, but I mean, real world examples make a
Yeah.
difference here. And,
Yeah, but it's a good one.
yeah, I think everyone recognizes the extent to which this is a instinctive drive within us. And again, it's something that we know how to do, but until later, without knowing the means by which we don't have cognitive knowledge necessarily of, the mechanism behind how we're able to do it, but we know how to do it.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
Yeah. And I think it's just, yep. And I just think it's so hard, even for maybe a lot of people listening in, to comprehend why this is important, because they just look outside of this call and see fitness, like as to how we language fitness. And it's hard to connect those. It's just hard to connect it as it being anything important at all. Because as I said, it's like it's just embedded, that physical. This is why I always go back to the intentions around that physicality, right? And understanding. Sure, it is folly, but you can put some kind of intention inside of that, you know, and that how I tie that in, which makes it like collective, is patterns, right? We all have, and I'm just using averages here, we have 5 fingers, right? We have opposing digit, arms. A lot of us can locomote, like, so what brings us all together? These patterns. We can observe and do them, the why behind doing them, this is the whole probably a different thing. So um, yeah, so I think I'm landing on it being there because of the biological underpinnings.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's definitely going to be different from like what's standardly termed a priori knowledge, but it's still an interesting
Okay.
connection to the philosophical thing because I think it's also going to bear on the what is fitness question, because a lot of what people think of today as fitness is stuff that
Yeah.
one needs to, well, it needs to learn, Orange Theory or cross country skiing or whatever. Whereas there's this whole slew of things that we innately know how to do that we don't as readily think of as fitness today.
Yeah.
And, I think one of your central theses is that all that stuff over here, like, you know, it's its own thing, but there's a whole slew of things that we can do on our own. There's a whole lot of fitness in us that doesn't need that extra stuff on top.
Yeah. I
That was
like
my
how you're soft over there.
that was my most diplomatic way of saying it. This is
Diversion tactic.
this is a gigantic pile of shit over here. So,
Uh,
um, so just to give people an idea of kind of the philosophy stuff behind this and how this connects to fitness, I wanted to talk about so an interesting question, philosophical question you might ask is like, what would it even mean to have knowledge that precedes experience or is independent of experience? Like, how would that even work? At first glance, it seems like all our knowledge of the world comes from experience. The fact that dogs have fur that feels soft, or that water quenches thirst, or that a flame causes burns. Those all need to be learned via experience. But as many philosophers have pointed out, there's a whole slew of things that seem to go beyond experience, that can't be learned from experience, or that are necessary for the possibility of experience. So, for example, logic. This is a famous one that the overwhelming majority of philosophers think that logic applies across all possible worlds. It's the rare philosopher who would argue that this is contingent to, Earth and humans and stuff like that.
mm,
So things like something cannot both be and not be something at the same time. Or if A, then B, A, therefore B. If it's raining, the ground is wet. It's raining, therefore the ground is wet. An alien civilization would understand something like
mm,
this, hypothetically.
exactly.
Math seems to be something that applies to reality, but we don't, we don't, we get confirmation of what we know about math from reality, but math does not derive its truth from me adding two stones to each other. Mathematicians are able to derive truths about math that then end up being true in the world, but we don't learn about math and mathematical truths the same way we learn that, gravitation has such and such force on the moon versus the earth and things like that.
Yeah.
Geometry, famously Euclid was able to derive all these truths about what a triangle should be and, a square, um, things like that. Theology, those are not things that we encounter in everyday life. Morality, the world teaches us is and not ought. So all these things thus far seem like things that you can't quite get just from experience. And then two famous modern examples. So Noam Chomsky, some people may know him politically in one realm, but he was a very famous,
Linguist, right?
yeah, linguist. Yeah. I was going to say psychologist, but that's
He's classified in there somewhere, some ways
yeah.
too.
So he basically he made a famous argument that children can't learn language just from what they hear from experience. There needs to be some universal grammar in the brain that precedes experience, because there's what he calls a poverty of the stimulus, meaning that you you could not glean the richness of our language just from what kids hear from their parents. There needs to be an apparatus up here that helps us interpret and decode that stuff. So, a famous example that he uses is we would never hear the phrase "I founded my toy" if we learned language just from experience, right? There's this apparatus up here that's necessary for the possibility of language.
Is this similar in the patterns thing that I was talking about?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think it's related. It's, there. I think in fitness there are, certain patterns that we have access to primarily, and they can obviously have different permutations, just like in a language there are different accents or dialects or different things like that that we learn from our parents. But there's certain base things that we have access to just insofar as we're human.
Yeah, and just because there's a shit ton of parents not teaching their kids about patterns doesn't mean that it's not inside of every child to be able to perform.
Yeah, and I mean, I literally just thought of this just as you were saying that, but the movement patterns are even more deeply embedded than the language. Like we think of language being this,
Yeah,
central thing to who we are, but language is, I don't know the exact dates on this, but I know
yeah,
for a fact it is far younger than the
yeah,
movement patterns.
yeah, yeah. No, Harari uh, did this with it. You can't see me what he like touched on it and clarified that in Sapiens um, around that and put those things what he called communication. And it was definitely after the whole movement process and pre like strong communication and language. Um, it made a really good case though for this is outside of this, but we'll continue on for when language did occur. That was also a real major shift in brain development and you can just imagine everything thereafter, currency, agriculture, and all those things.
Yeah, and it does have another interesting connection to what we're talking about with fitness, in the sense that like it is dependent on a certain biology, vocal cords, the ability to project, things like that. It initially was a matter of experience and learning and trial and error, like making certain vocalizations, and then now we all have this universal grammar within us. But initially, of course, we didn't. And similar thing with the movement patterns. I'm sure for a long part of our evolutionary history, just like the first fish that came up on land, there's a whole bunch of like trial and error and don't quite get it, and then they reach the right program, and then that replicates itself and gets more and more successful.
Yep. Yep. And then we were all just howling at the moon for a long period of time.
Yeah,
And then all of a sudden we recognized that when we started eating those who were howling at the moon, we could speak more clearly, which is kind of interesting. Oh,
yeah,
wow. This sharing of sounds, if we actually consume with this fire thing, light, and all of a sudden it's like now it's called fire. This is Saturday. Remember the Saturday Night Live skit? Was it? Oh God.
oh yeah, yeah, the it was
Uh,
Phil Hartman, I want to say,
yes.
caveman. Yeah,
So good. Anyways, let's not go down that hole. But yeah, that's yeah, probably had something tied into there with the good fats in meat and brain development and language tools.
yeah, but hopefully people are starting to see, like, especially with that language one, we don't just learn everything from experience. Like there are certain things that are necessary for the possibility of experience. And Kant, the guy who I studied, who's kind of a progenitor of modern day cognitive psychology, was very famous for arguing for this. Whereas Chomsky argues for the notion of a poverty of the stimulus, Kant, in a certain way, argues that there's too much, there's too many stimuli coming from the world. Like literally, the world is buzzing with stimuli, and unless your brain could like quiet these other things and like synthesize things together, you could not have experience. We couldn't hear a melody unless we had kind of this unified consciousness that could connect one note to the next, or we couldn't count to five unless we remembered, oh, previously I counted to two and three and four. So all these things are all just by way of saying, if you think all of our knowledge just comes from experience, there's a whole bunch of it that comes from experience. Absolutely. But there are certain elements to our knowledge that there's certain cognitive capacities that we require for even the possibility of experience, without which we could not even get on in the world. And
Yes.
this definitely has a tie into fitness, I think. So,
Yeah, I think wonderful part of Kant's story too is that with the current technology and MRI studies and genetic profiling, et cetera, today, and not just to use those two, but um, what would be dates that Kant came up with this? Just as give.
so his life was 1724 to 1804. So
Okay, so folks, this is 200 years ago, and Kant could, with thoughts and pen and paper, come up with these ideas that are showing to be true with the technology we have available today, even to the point of stimulation, right? He posited this without having any evidence scientifically to prove that, right? And now what do we see with evidence of that? Yeah, we hook people up, we give them, things that are going on, and we have this medicalized opportunity, and I should say medicalized, but I'm really meaning a scientific opportunity to have some way of actually knowing objectively how many pieces of information are coming at us. Like we can measure this right now, and so I just wanted to make that point that, and that may just add to the story of this, Kant's point. It's strengthened because of what he just observed and really couldn't be proven truly. But now, 200 years later, it's like it's classically done all the time. I just think that's wonderful.
oh yeah, I mean it's yeah, it's amazing. It's similar to Newton. It's
Yeah.
similar to pen and paper. Well,
Yeah.
and just
And
thinking.
how many times has that been repeated? In studies that's like, like what, 36,000 times over and over. It's like, yep, it's true. Yep, it's true. Yeah, it's anyways, I just sorry, sort of go off on that one, but
Oh no,
that's
no,
wonderful because well, I guess it does tie in here in that some of those things that these mentors really of ours have said on how we gain that knowledge, and that's a key point for fitness and how we gain knowledge on fitness, right? And a lot of it because of its physical experience and biological underpinnings, it's there for the taking.
yeah,
There for the expression. Yeah, and I think expression may tie in that word between a priori and next episode of experience. I think because expression is that middle zone of like, well, you got this, and you had it. You've always had it. Now that you're aware of it, well, what do you do? What do you do? Right?
right.
And I think we've been going reverse backwards. It's like I have been expressing myself physically for a long period of time. And then of course it just bubbles up to this like, geez, you know, how much do I really need to know to express this? You know? Um, and now we're just working backwards. I think the expression aspect is really cool as well.
Yeah, no, it's I mean it's it's interesting, the connection with Kant. Kant talks about how we have um certain a priori concepts that require an experiential component to kind of be activated. It made me think of this notion of, you can have people who innately have the knowledge of how to like walk, run, squat, jump, and they have not expressed it, but it's still in them. And then the people who like they have instantiated these things.
This is this is what brings you and I together. This is the crux, right? It's like it's we're all agreeing upon, we know it's there, but now we're doing all this madness experience in order to come back on some of these basics of like, it's there, so how do we use what's there? I think that's what is interesting about it. You want to ask the really hard questions about it, and with my experience in it, we both know there's something there that needs to be discussed, and hence what brings us to this moment and this time and this topic.
Exactly. Interesting little historical side note in relation to this. I don't know how many things Kant lifted. Do you even lift, Kant? You even lift, bro? But he is famous in biographies for taking daily walks,
Yeah.
Like that was like people famously in Königsberg, they would time their clocks or watches or whatever was the timepiece back then, according to his walk. So he was regularly engaged in fitness activity.
Yeah. Well, for another time, my friend. I spent a lot of time thinking about that. I think it's not people in fitness or thinkers in fitness don't put enough time into this. Is to discuss the truths in the physical experience of those great thinkers and some of the stuff that is generally not unfolded. It's always the classic, well, Einstein smoked whatever 3 times a day or drank, it's like that's just generally where everyone goes. But I love also discussing some of the things no one talked about of the physical experiences of these people. Because I have numerous stories, not just I did hear about that story about Kant, ironically. Um, and anyways, another time we'll discuss that because I think that's important. Of what people just considered, they just said, "Oh, it was a meditative practice," or I just did my day to day. I just do my day to day. It's like, what was your day to day? Oh, I just tended to animals and like lifted these things. It's like, oh well, how come you didn't mention that? You know, and the reason why we didn't mention it is because, as I said previous times, physicality was just something that was required to, I think, raise cognitive potential. And they didn't even recognize the physicality aspect of it that was allowing them to express themselves cognitively at such a high level. That's my thoughts and range, you know. And so I think it's important to discuss this on podcasts and write books about it and have these discussions because I think it's taken for granted that they were just this classic sit in a chair and the brain just operated like, and building range through that. It's like, no, no, there was a lot of rest, a lot of natural processes, a lot of physicality, underpinnings inside of it that allowed them to have that range, So anyway,
Yeah, agreed.
well, another time, but that's a good one.
Okay, so we've talked a bit about, what sort of health slash fitness knowledge, well, really fitness knowledge that we possess, this knowledge how of like walk, squat, run, jump, lift, crawl, these movement patterns. Um, to me, the interesting other philosophical questions that we can ask here, and I'm curious to see if you have any others, but the main one is, what is the implication of this fact? We have this within us. And I think this, the reason I'm bringing this up as something for us to discuss is I think this touches on one of the main things that you've been touching on as we've been going through this. And obviously in OPEC CCP and things like that is, what are the implications of the fact that we have this knowledge of how to move in this way for the practice of fitness?
Yeah.
Are these another question that's related to that is, are these movement patterns sufficient, entirely sufficient for the practice of fitness? Do we just need to be doing body weight stuff? Or, there's some basic lifting, or are they just necessary but not sufficient? So I guess I'll open things up there and see, what do you think the implications are of the fact that we have this stuff within us for the practice of fitness today?
Yeah, I think I like your final word today. The application of said knowledge, I think, is a really strong thing we need to push into, um, like really push into. Um, and you're going to arrive at what I think this really nice argument in your own mind of like, what is my intentions of doing the push up? As meaning, am I doing the push up because it's going to lead to 6-pack abs? Or am I doing the push up because I have just discovered that I can do a push up and it was inside of me all along to do a push up? And so I think that now that we know we have these things currently to today, I think our biggest, I'd say generally the public's biggest thing is to continue to grow knowledge of these implicit things these things that are inside of us, just to grow knowledge about that. And so, and maybe I'm just saying it in a different way that I've said now for 24 episodes, right? I think it does. We got to push people to the idea that this is a it becomes an aha moment right away. It's like, this stuff's inside of you. Do you know that you can do all these patterns? And what are we going to do about it, right? Are we going to lean into those patterns because we can do them? Yes. Why? Why? Because they're within you, not because we're going to do it to get this outcome. It's because they're within you. So I hope I made my point on just using the push-ups as an example. We want to do push-ups not to get six-pack abs or bigger biceps to reproduce. We want to get, to do push-ups because we can all push, because, like in my language, I say, because we are able, we are capable, we can do those movements. So I think that's I would say for today, that's the biggest area of struggle and strife, and is to is to just get on with the fact that we can all do these patterns, and to just put it into play that allows people to enjoy it, but also to embed those correct intentions with the practicing of those patterns. You know, and where you're going to come up against, which we always do, is a quick realization that it actually doesn't have transfer to your life, to most of your life, right? This is the challenging thing, right? We're not all firemen, so when we're doing those, when the questions are inside of it, should be, oh, I'm just doing this because I'm capable of pushing the movement, and it just helps me grow my mind. That's why I'm doing it. Oh, I thought it was functional to help you if you fall out of your chair and land and catch yourself and then quickly get back up. Is like, how many times that happened to 7.8 billion people, right? I got to come up with more humorous examples, but
doing the muscle up through the window.
yeah, we're all nefarious deep down. Why are you going inside of a window? Does the person know you're opening up the window?
Yeah. Wait, what?
But you get my point on the yeah, it's there, and I think that's our big issue for today. Yeah,
Okay.
just getting on with it. Like, we have these patterns, they're well accepted, they're known, the books have been written on it, meaning, not books, but as a metaphorical um, concept to that. There's been 100 million books written on that, of what people are capable of doing in patterns. It's just that there has to be some intentions inside it of you doing it simply because it is a innate thing.
Okay. So follow-up question on that,
Mhm.
going back to our discussion of necessary versus sufficient.
Yeah.
Do you think the movement patterns, do you think the elements of fitness that we have innate within us are entirely sufficient for the practice of fitness, meaning that that's all you need and you don't need anything else? Or do you think they are necessary but not sufficient, meaning that you would need to learn, basic barbell stuff or whatever else you want to put in the experiential category?
Yeah, no, there. I think the classic, walking in the sun and lifting rocks. I think that's, you can get all the patterns, all the concepts, and we can philosophically talk about, well, how do you develop, those patterns in that. Um, so I think that, I'm not sure what my answer is there, but I think it's we have all those patterns that are sufficient to operate inside of a physical universe. That's enough. I think I land there. Am I correct on that? I think
I think so. Yeah. I mean,
you
yeah. So
yeah.
basically, you're saying that like
You
all
don't
these,
need leg presses to become.
right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I mean, even aside from I guess the silly ones that we mentioned today, do you think there's anything that, and we'll touch on this next time too, like, is there anything that a human needs to learn from experience, like any specific new movement or something like that they don't already have innately within them, that they need to learn for the practice of fitness. It seems to me that you're saying, no, basically, I mean, obviously when someone goes about, their existence, they refine things like, oh, I learned how to lift that better. I learned how to walk better and things like that. But those are just refinements of things that are already within us.
Yeah.
But you're saying we don't, there's nothing with regard to dumbbell curls or thrusters.
No.
Yeah.
No. And I'm really, I get emotional on this one because so many people want to sell the concept of what I call the therapeutic paradigm to that. And it seeps inside of that conversation. Um, it's, yeah, anyways,
Okay.
I think it's there. I think it's there. You don't need a 27-hour course on ensuring you have right co-contraction mechanisms of your diaphragm to get people to move in fitness.
Okay.
No secret sauce there. You know what you can do? You can just learn how to pick things up when you're young and carry them.
So this leads to another.
Play in trees, roughhouse, run around, get dirty. You're going to do all those patterns. And then as an adult, you can keep it as a ritual of all those patterns in nature. I just keep thinking about natural components without the globo gym, to our point on like, well, what was considered, even was unconscious recreational leisure natural pursuits of physicality in 875 AD, right? There actually is literature on this as to what that looked like, right? But you know, what was there, and what was there? And I call it's an unconscious method of physicality, because people probably, figured out, like, we think we have the secret sauce to, but they figured out probably a long time ago. They just didn't have language for it. Pushing, pulling, lunging. I'm sure someone talked about it. No one wrote about it. Actually, I'm sure if you were look really hard in Billy Shakespeare's stuff, there's something in there. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if, I mean, it's not the main thing taught about Aristotle, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, he was a biologist, what we would today call a biologist, in a whole number of different ways. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some element to that.
Yeah.
Um, Another philosophical follow-up question on that point, with regard to roughhouse and climb and move around is, philosophers, probably one of the most central questions philosophers ask with regard to politics or morality or knowledge is, what's the difference between us and the animals? So I'm curious, animals obviously have certain patterns innate within them that they express. In your mind, is there anything unique to the practice of fitness, or that should be unique to the practices of fitness for humans? Is it the fact that we can reflect upon it, or improves our mental acuity, or like what separates, I guess, what would be the practice of fitness that humans engage in when they are expressing these innate motor patterns from the practice of animals? Or is there a difference? Should there be a difference?
Yeah, I think on a really basic level, it's probably just what I guess, where we call, consciousness today, or that's would be the separator, really, of some of the basic things that I think about, meaning the decisions to have the conversation around what it is like to be a bat. we can we can have that conversation, like, I don't know why I find it humorous, but we could, like, you know, uh, yeah, I just find it humorous. And I think it sounds humorous, but that's the intricate difference. I think is for whatever reason, which is kind of it's a good place to do some readings on, right? What the separation, and was there a separation between, all of us being classified in animals, and then some kind of shift occurrence based upon that, and evolution. And I think it's to be able to even cognitively have the repertoires available to think about these things, like, and ironically, we can, with all that raised cognitive ability, it actually makes us crazy around these basic things that are very similar to animal processes. So I think the only thing that's separation there is the ability to have the conversation around the differences. That's very meta. It's
Okay. I guess one of the other things I'm wondering about is, one of the other things that's uniquely human is, I mean, well, they're proto versions, obviously, in other animals, but tools.
Yeah. Right.
And humans have this ability to make tools, which today look like treadmills and barbells and dumbbells. And so
Yes.
I wonder about that. To what extent, obviously we share with animals this ability. We have motor patterns that we then express, but as humans, we also have this ability to create tools to
Yeah.
engage in fitness in different ways. And is that
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
superfluous or extra or misguided, or is that?
No, I think there's primal. I think it does go back to primal pieces. If you were just to interject, axe and spear with like a wood chopper on a pulley system, again, it goes back to the intentions of doing the movement, right? So the wood chopper is folly because you're actually not chopping wood to put fire in your home to keep your kids safe and to allow you to make food so you can survive and reproduce, right? But there was a time where you actually had to swing that thing that you created numerous times. So do you see what I'm saying? You're not like, oh, that was my 18th rep at 10XO. You didn't say this 6,000 years ago, but you still did 1,000 reps every third day. Do you know what I mean? So the tools, yeah, I think we've created these tools, but there still has to be some of that conversation on the intention and the act inside of that. And I'd like to see fitness move more towards that. It's just not a well accepted notion today of this
Yes.
visualization, right? Of these patterns. You do them because you're able and because it's for you, right? And I just don't think a lot of people, for good reason, um, are not there yet to have that conversation. Yeah. So tools, great point. Yeah. We have that is a big differentiator because we've created these tools. And why did we create tools in the past? What was the main reason behind creating tools? Is to prepare food, is to build shelters, is to capture animals, right? Is to fuel ourselves with the
Right.
environment, what's around us. So,
And now we exist in a state where we don't necessarily, the vast majority of us don't need those types of tools on a daily basis. So we've created tools for other things, for bicep
yes,
curls and for thrusters and for.
yes, which they're still, it's still a wood chopper. You know what I'm saying? It's still a wood chopper movement, but the intentions are all wrong, in my opinion. Right.
Okay.
And to my point, we discussed, I think that's a futile process until some over time. And this is where you and I, or you, not there's no disagreement there, but that you've asked me a question about this before. Isn't it just possible unconsciously people can get to it? They can just like unconsciously keep practicing, and all of a sudden over time, it's like, I get it. I don't think that's the case in most cases. I think it's a futile attempt if you're just doing exercise without some conversation on intentions. There has to be a connection.
Yeah, and you're saying that more on the note, more in regards to like if someone is just independently working out on their own, they won't just magically come to that notion. Or you're saying it
Yeah.
even with a coach having that discussion.
Well, maybe both. I'm just saying if I'm assuming then the coach doesn't have the knowledge either, right? The client over time, just even in their practices, if every waking moment of all their flow zone they're in when they're doing wood choppers, if they don't get to the point of the awareness of that being folly, then it's futile. All of it, the whole thing is futile attempts. And then you're entering into, well, what do you consider success and what do you consider longevity? It's like, well, that's a whole separate thing that we've actually covered before. So you can go back to those previous episodes.
Check that out. Link in bio. All right. Well, I think that was a good discussion for today.
Yeah, I also think we did a good job of setting up the not touching on experience too much, which is kind of good.
Yeah, because
Yeah, I think there's
that
lots in there.
that I imagine is going to be a big one. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm hoping we can hit on a lot of the stuff we've previously discussed before. Of some of the challenges with that is well, how do we ever get to that point if there's not experience, right? Those are the or with the amount of experience, I should say, like how many times and repetition and all that experience does it need to really get to quality prescriptions and therefore quality knowledge, and so yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I mean, the question I'm almost left with after today is, I mean, it almost did a switch back to the innate stuff, right? Where if we're saying the innate stuff is sufficient for true fitness experience, or for, a true um, fitness program or something like that, how much is experience really necessary? I mean, it's necessary maybe as a refinement of little things of like, oh, I'm walking better by doing this, or I'm lifting better by doing X, Y, or Z, but
Yeah.
really it's the innate stuff driving the boat, and experience is just there to give subtle refinements to what is innate within us, if I'm understanding what you were saying before correctly.
Yes, and so I'm glad you finished with that. So hopefully you can remember that, setting us up for the next one, because that is a good area, a good place for us to have some challenge.
Yep.
And I think I want to color the next one as well with context around what progression means. That has to be inside of it, because you know how it can just fall flat of like, well, what are you defining as consistency? What is inside that consistency that leads to experience, right?
Right.
Well, it's not just the same thing all the time, because we have these overriding things of adaptation and this, dare I say, the will to be challenged. That's something more than what we did previously experience, right? So experience is not just check, check, check. I'm getting ahead of myself, but we'll discuss the context of what challenge and progression is inside of that too.
Awesome.
Yeah. Super duper. Thanks for that. I previously, offline, those didn't know that, but I had some, subsequently, some things that I needed some clearing up with today on, ironically, on the knowledge of this topic. And you helped clear those up. So I appreciate that. You also, I wrote down some notes. Whenever I write notes down from this, it always leads to some good learning for myself. So I appreciate that. Some things I can think about.
Yeah, and I appreciate, yeah, the points you raised today, just about I'm getting an even clearer picture about, I had a good sense of what your view was before, but I mean, it's becoming clearer and clearer, and just the role that experience plays versus innate stuff. And I guess to a certain extent, what we're saying is fitness biology is really sufficient for things, and fitness culture is folly.
Yes. Yeah. Which is why I'm looking forward to that topic over time and where that fits in, because there's a lot of things that are already there. But hey, what else are we going to do if we're not going to discuss those things?
Right?
Yeah.
We need to get James from 2008 on the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
Have
sure
it like a time traveling.
I'm sure there's some recordings. We just like embed it, and then come back to current. We could do it.
Yeah, the time travel episode.
Yeah. Yeah. And then everyone in the future in 2199 will really be like, oh, remember that one? Those guys,
Yeah,
that was a great one. They hit it out of the park on that one.
yeah. We were actually the first instance of time travel in human history.
Yeah. 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 They'll be quoting us like we do with Orwell today.
Yeah. Oh man.
All righty.
All right. Well, thank you
Thanks
again,
so
James.
much. I'll send this over.
Cool.
Thanks for everything. Take care.
All right. Have a great weekend.